William Marshal needs no introduction. He's the most famous knight in history. He served 4 kings, 5 if you include Henry the Young King. So, without further ado, let's get stuck in. It's 1177, and William Marshal, along with Henry the Young King and the Meunier, had been touring the tournament circuit of Normandy and Aquitaine for around a year now. Though they were still getting ribbed for being a bit of a clown show, they were increasingly racking up the wins. So opinions are changing, and they were swiftly becoming the most feared team in the region. More importantly for them was the renown, and of course the money was flooding in. The Marshal also participated in many tournaments on his own without the Young King or the Meunier, racking up even more renown. To put it bluntly, he was quite the tournament addict. One of the main reasons for William Marshal to join other events without the Young King appears to be that young Henry's baggage train was too unwieldy and took too long to get from one event to the other, leaving the Marshal time to participate in other tournaments, like a Pleur, which the Marshal attended solo. And there are some really big names here. Okay, let's drop a few names. We all know Philippe, Count of Flanders? Cool. There's also Theobald, Count of Blois. We've known him before. He once tried to kidnap Eleanor of Aquitaine, and eventually married her daughter, Alice. You've got Duke Hugh of Burgundy. He's always warring with the King of France, Louis VII. We also have Guillaume de Bar, a renowned crusader. We also have James of Avesnes, another knight in this grand event. Now, the Marshal himself is no whippersnapper. He's around 30, but his renown is nothing compared to the veterans of the tournament circuit. And at Pleur, we learn that the Marshal has his great helm smashed to his scalp. He gets a proper kick in there, but is also fighting his hardest and winning against the others. He's in the thick of it. Not only that, the Marshal relishes in this, and had great fun even though he gets a battering. Such a battering that he could not remove his helm. Right, after the event, it is explained that around the campfires, the barons are all discussing who will get the prize of man of the match, for lack of a better term, and the Marshal is elected to win the prize. Though not because he wins the tournament, but because he is found head stuck in his helm, laying on an anvil, with the blacksmith trying to hammer it off. So everyone gets a good laugh and he wins the prize. But it's not buffoonery, it's bravery. You do not get your helm caved in for being a coward. No, you earn it by getting right in the thick of it, taking on multiple opponents and fighting concussion while you're at it. Then head into the beer tent once the helm was off. These were tales that were building up the reputation and character of the Marshal. So yes, the mood is changing. Especially since the wins are racking up. And clown show or not, even powerful magnates like Count Theobald of Blois enjoyed the company of the Marshal, who was invited to his residence in the town of Epinal. But after hearing a commotion outside, William Marshal rushed outside of the hall, not even waiting to be excused by his superiors. He rushes into the stables, only to find some scallywag in the process of stealing his horse. A magnificent beast it was. But before the Marshal could react, the thief was off, speeding into the distance. On foot, the Marshal took chase. He has no chance of outrunning a horse, so he follows the hoofprints in the dirt. There, in a dark alley, our hero heard the heavy breathing of someone hiding, plus the sounds of a horse, all hiding behind a cart. What does the Marshal do? He grabs a piece of wood from the cart and proceeds to beat the thief, so hard in fact that one of his eyeballs popped out. Now, horse theft was a capital offence, meaning the thief was to be hanged. Yet, the Marshal tells Count Theobald he wants the scoundrel spared, as the man clearly had suffered enough. William Marshal's getting a reputation even off the tournament field. When it came to the Minier itself, like I said earlier, from their beginnings as inexperienced knights, getting roughhoused by the others, they had turned things around considerably. They were something to be feared and had learned to fight well as a squadron. Under the Marshal's advice, young Henry, who's in his early 20s by the way, he's a grown man, he's just younger than his father. The young king and the Minier were now being honed into a formidable fighting machine, employing and training only the very best. The young king would lead the Minier into the fray, and the others, trained by the Marshal, would form up around him, delivering crushing charges. And by protecting their lord, it meant denying others that high ransom they desired, having to settle for one of the lesser knights, while the Minier would beeline for the richer targets, easily overpowering them. One of the Marshal's friends in the young king's Minier was a Flemish knight by the name of Roger of Joy, an amazing horseman who had a reputation for greed. And by the late 70s, these two men, William and Roger, had pretty much formed a two-man team. While working with the Minier, they would often peel off and conduct lightning strikes on stragglers, collecting the ransoms, then riding back to the main squadron. But when the Marshal took part in his solo events, Roger would now accompany him, and together they racked up a seemingly impossible amount of ransoms. They are winning on an industrial scale. And before we dismiss it as mere bragging, remember they've got the clerk, Regent. He's keeping all the books. Between the two of them, Willie and Roger, they are not just gaining renown, but riches beyond their wildest dreams. John the Monk, who has been tasked with writing down the famous histories of William Marshal, he was appalled by this. He's working from Wigane's original books, a source long lost, and he comments that between Whitsun and Lent, a short 2-month period, these two rapscallions, William and Roger, captured a whopping great 103 ransoms, enough to amass a small fortune. So much for the humble cult of chivalry. The young king's Minier is now raking it in. Though the 103 captured knights, well, they certainly showed largesse by giving their ransom money to the two scallywags who promptly divvied up the cash. The two, Willie and Roger, did have a reputation as misers, but we also know that a chunk of this coin was donated by the Marshal to good causes like alms, the church and the Holy Land. So the Marshal certainly held up the chivalric idea of largesse, at least to an extent. I'll give an example. At one event, a popular song, sung by the troubadours, involved the famous knight, "Marshal, give me a good horse." So at one event, he came across a chap singing it to a crowd. Without second thought, the Marshal threw himself into the commissale, the single jousts, and won a horse, then gave it to the troubadour who'd sung the song. This is the Marshal. This is what he's like. He's becoming a superstar. It is recorded in his histories that the Marshal is leading the young king's Minier at another tournament held at Sorel in Eure-et-Loire, a small area just below the Vexin. They are doing good, business as usual, but the Marshal was unhorsed twice, and twice his horses were stolen from him before he could remount them, by knights of low renown. It is noted that they were good war horses. Now, unlike before with the thief, on the tournament field, this isn't horse theft, but a good cheeky tactic. It's merely knights taking the horses back to the lists as a ransom. And to be honest, by now, many knights were probably fed up with the Marshal winning everything. He's the Hulk Hogan of the 12th century tournament circuit. What you gonna do, brother? And going by his statue, he's even got the moustache. But good luck ripping a male shirt. The Marshal haggles for hours to buy the horses back, later boasting that he wangled one for just £7. It was worth 40. Here the Marshal also shows his darker side. He accuses one knight of horse theft, calls him a coward. The poor young man is the nephew of Guillaume de Bar, and at this point the Marshal's reputation is so high that even Guillaume de Bar can't really do anything except try and persuade the Marshal, with limited success. It doesn't work for me, brother. But nothing really happens of this. The matter is dropped. It looks as if the whole situation is just the Marshal giving a younger knight a real dressing down, putting him in his place. Still, Marshal, bad form, old boy, bad form. Thankfully, incidents like these were few and far between. His regular character was one of chivalry and virtue. He's becoming an icon. More and more people will emulate the Marshal. He's only around 30, but he's the 12th century equivalent of a superstar, especially with the cult of chivalry spreading, evolving, with men like Marshal paving the way. This is where the idea of chivalry truly comes into its own. And it's not just him who's reaching this superstar status, especially as the young king looked poised to inherit the kingdom one day. People of the age were even comparing young Henry to Alexander the Great. They compared him to the legendary King Arthur, his Menier, the Knights of the Round Table. His younger brother Richard the Lionheart was already considered part of the prophecy of Merlin. Henry the young king, the father of chivalry, leading one of the most effective military households in Europe. People worshipped the ground he walked on, pretty much. To all the unbelievers, even Philip of Flanders is taking their lead. He's embracing these chivalric ideals. He's upping his standards. I've upped my standards, so up yours too. Something big is going on. Even his father, Henry II, was proud, using his own influence to cement the young king's presence to Europe. And in 1179, on his father's orders, the young king was summoned back to England. And the Marshal went with him. The Marshal hasn't left the tournament circuit, far from it. It's a short break to England because his lord had been recalled by his father. And for the first time in 3 years, they set foot on home soil, not as rebels, but as heroes. And very wealthy, because, by now, the young king can afford to pay his knights well. 20 shillings. A whopping paycheck. In contrast, the king, Henry II, he's paying his men 7 times less. So, we can akin this to Premier League football players here. These are more sports stars than soldiers, each earning a packet. Back in England, the Marshal becomes what was known as Knight Banneret, meaning that even though he's part of the young king's Menier, he's permitted to carry his own personal banner. He's even got the rights to have a retinue of his own for when he attends tournaments solo. The Marshal's banner boasted his own personal device, the familiar Gules Lion Rampant on a party per pale division, or invert. Okay, I'll explain it better. Lion Rampant being the charge, the heraldic beast, reared on its hind legs, ready to fight. The field being the background, it's divided into 2 halves, which is party per pale. And the tincture, that is the colours, are thus: red, which is gules, or, which is gold, vert, which is green. The device of the Marshal. And soon he'll get a chance to fly high at the greatest tournament of them all, Longy-sur-Marne. Okay, before we get into that, I'll explain the reasons why this great tournament was held in the first place. Right. The French throne was in peril. After decades of trying to secure an heir to the throne, the King of France, Louis VII, has only one son, a boy of 14 called Philippe. All the rest are girls who cannot rule due to the French Salic law. And King Louis is almost 60. His health is bad. He's not likely to sire any more children. As per Frankish tradition, he wishes to secure his line by creating Philippe as the young King of France, just like Henry II did with Henry the Young King. But all this was put in peril during an ill-fated hunting trip. There, Philippe got lost in the wild woodland. No one could find him, save a peasant, a woodsman. But the lad had been exposed to the elements and became ill. Gravely ill. He's currently back with his family in Paris with the best apothecaries, but a miracle is needed for him to recover from this illness. So King Louis is about to do something unheard of. He's about to take a pilgrimage to, of all places, Canterbury in England, to the shrine of the recently made saint, St. Thomas Becket, to pray for the soul of his beloved son. This he does. On the 22nd of August, 1179, a small French fleet landed in Dover, greeted by, of all people, his long-time adversary, King Henry II, this time meeting in peace. Then, from Dover, the two kings headed straight for Canterbury. Louis no doubt met with the other man he considered family, Henry the Young King, who was a good friend of his, and his own daughter, Marjorie, as she was the young queen. Louis had also brought 100 barrels of good French wine for the clergy at Canterbury Cathedral. I bet that went down well. Phew, I'm surprised any of the monks were sober enough to conduct mass. In a few months' time, it'll be Christmas. And the clergy were known for their inebriated antics, as drunk as monks. Anyway. For 3 days, Louis remained at the shrine, hoping that a miracle would save his son's life and continue the long reign of the Capetian kings. It was if someone had listened. As back in France, the young lad did in fact get better. His health was restored, but at a cost. Like a Greek tragedy, one life for another. A trade that the French king would have no doubt have made in a heartbeat. Because upon returning to Paris, King Louis suffers a stroke. He survived, barely, and at such cost, paralysed one side down his body, and his speech greatly reduced. He could no doubt have felt the reaper's scythe grazing his shoulder. Louis was already old before his time, frail and ill, and this trip had sapped the last of the strength he had left. But he was still king, frail or not, so he made preparations for the heir apparent of France to be crowned the young King of France, thus securing the Capetian crown. This glorious event was planned for November 1179 at the city of Reims, east of Paris, deep into French territory. Half of Europe's nobility would be there. This was to be a grand event, and it would be rude not to throw in a tournament for good measure. So, naturally, Henry the Young King assembles his squadron of elite sportsmen, including the Marshal, now also flying his own banner, and with the English king's blessing, headed off all the way to France for the coronation of France's young king. Plus the greatest tournament of the 12th century, which just happened to be going on at the same time, the Longy-sur-Marne. And when young King Henry and his retinue arrived at home, after the long journey across France, and I'm not kidding when I say long journey. Right, give this a varder. Oh, he knows all the Polari. Oh, stop messing about. Anyway, now that's out of the system, let's carry on. The young king, along with his celebrated Meunier, were guests of honour at the coronation of Philippe, France's new young king, as this was to occur before any jousting took place. At the coronation itself, the ceremonial sword was to be carried by Philippe, Count of Flanders, another hero of the tournament circuit. We've met him on a few occasions. Then Philip, no, not the Count of Flanders, the heir apparent of France, was crowned king, and arose as the young king of France, much to his father's joy. But here, all eyes were on another father, the father of chivalry himself, Henry, Henri, and is known over there. And the two young kings got along really well. One day, these two men could run two adjacent kingdoms, and one day there could be lasting peace between the two realms. So, all Philippe, the young king of France, needs to do now is get married and have a couple of boys and effectively reboot the Capetian dynasty. No pressure there then. Once the obligatory feast was done, it was time to move to an area just east of Paris, Longy-sur-Marne, for the greatest tournament ever thrown. And some of you might be familiar with the area, as it is right next to Disneyland Paris, Marny-le-Folie, and take in mind that the tournament itself would have taken up a huge amount of space. These events often took up miles of space, going from one town to another. They were huge, and this one was more exceptional than all the others. So imagine it. In those days, you could probably walk from Longy-sur-Marne to Marne-la-Vallée in about an hour or so. Though in the 12th century, the most famous cow in history, Mickey Mouse, had yet to set his gaze over the area. Anyway, so enough about him. Back to the tournament. It was the largest tournament of the 12th century and still hadn't been beaten by the 13th. It had a huge turnout. No one had seen anything like it, and this opulent event was expensive. Enough cash had been spent on it to fund a crusade. Over 3,000 knights would attend this tournament, then add all the tents and setup. All the usual suspects in the tournament circuit would be here. Big names like Guillaume de Bar and the Duke of Burgundy. The Meunier of the young king also had a special mention. This Meunier itself now numbered no less than 80 knights. This was the tournament team. 15 of these knights had been named as banneret along with the Marshal, and these 15 bannerets all had around 10 to 15 knights of their own, the Marshal having 15. That's over 200 men. This is a sizable faction. Just paying for it would cost a whacking great £200 a day. This isn't including any extras like admin costs, because we've got to add all the servants and all the staff who operate the stables. These people act like a pick team. You've got the squires, the pages, the wives, the children, the men-at-arms, anyone who could accompany them on this grand tournament, plus copious amounts of wine. And here another name joins the Minier, another banneret called Baldwin of Bethune. Baldwin is French, but leads Henry's growing cult of Flemish followers, like Roger of Joy. Baldwin's also a good friend of the Marshal. As for the tournament itself, it was chaos. There were many injuries. It is recorded that the entire field was swarmed by knights, and not an inch of ground could be seen. Pretty much one huge 3,000-man dog pile. Even the young king would fall foul of this when his helm is wrenched from his head, but he's not bothered. He fights on. But despite the chaos, there was pomp and circumstance everywhere, and many a banner held high. A colourful sight for all the onlookers, and the event in general goes very well indeed. Here it is where the Marshal rides his own personal banner into the fray for the first time. From now on, people would remember this device. He was at the height of his career, superstar status, an icon. One of the most feared and respected knights in all Europe. Meanwhile, once the celebrations were done, old crippled King Louis retired from public life, passing the reins to his son. The kingdom was in his hands now. The Marshal himself, though, is also having a hard time. Mainly later, but possibly this goes back as far as 1179, as the Minier would be taking a short break from the tournament circuit. We'll get into that in a bit. The Marshal is learning that fame comes at a price, as tensions were growing within the Minier. The Lozingiers that the histories speak of, the deceivers, the liars, who fired the rumour mill, well, 5 of these people were accusing the Marshal of squirreling away money that was meant for the young king and the Minier. They also accuse him of generally acting above his station, acting more like a celebrity, and stealing the young king's spotlight. Not a good thing. He's meant to be a vassal. Made worse when the Marshal employs his own herald to brag about his exploits at the lists, a man named Henri Le Nourice. Also around now, the Marshal was borrowing the young king's war cry and modifying it to his own end. So now it's not a Desae, but Desae le Marshal, meaning God is for the Marshal. Whew, that's quite a boast. So, who were these deceivers? Well, we don't truly know. Only 2 are named. Thomas of Colons, he's a knight who had participated in a previous tournament, so he may have an axe to grind, so to speak, and Adam Hibouf, a loyal member of the young king's Minier who had been around since day one. The other 3 plotters, as I said, we just do not know. But there is strong evidence that the young king's seneschal was one of these deceivers. Anyway. Old King Louis passed away in the September of 1180, a shadow of his one great self, his illness having only grown worse over the year. Thus the crown itself passed to young Philippe, who was only around 15 years old. A new dawn had opened on the Kingdom of France, a new era. And the next year, in 1181, there was even a new peace deal settled in the Vexin that favoured the English king, Henry II, and relations between the 2 kingdoms are going well. But if anything, it seems like the English king is using his son, young Henry, to influence the course of the Capetian king, Philippe of France. Something Henry II is no stranger to doing, that is, pushing around the French cause. And, despite the young king technically being the Duke of Normandy, Henry II was still hogging all the power. And it's not like the French were going to do anything about it, especially as their new king was a sickly teenager. None of this suits the young king, Henry, and there are hints that his own Minier especially the Marshal, are pressuring him for extra pay. The problem being, young Henry can't control Normandy due to his father's hoggage. Another problem the young king faced was Philippe, the Count of Flanders, focusing his allegiance on the new King of France rather than on young Henry and his cult of chivalry. But the court of the Capetian king wasn't at Flanders' side when it came down to the Vexin, as the young king's Meunier were scrambled to war, and after a brief scrap, they gave the Count of Flanders a proper shoeing. We don't truly know if the Marshal had joined them in these skirmishes, as his histories do not mention it. But his tournament schedule is empty for this year, 1181, which suggests he may well have joined his lord in the squabble with the Count of Flanders. And it makes sense that the young king would take his feared tournament team to square off against an old rival. After all, tournaments were merely a way to get experience for real war, and the young king's Meunier have been slapping Flanders around Normandy on an industrial scale, probably why the conflict was so brief. Once again, young Henry was doing all of the work for no real reward, as the old king was unwilling to share power. But this autocratic mindset only seemed to apply to the young king, may I add, as the other brothers, Richard Coeur de Lion and Geoffrey, were doing well. Even John was on the up. Right, Richard was Duke of Aquitaine, and enjoying all of the advantages of power that came with it. Geoffrey had the same in Brittany, so it really does appear to be only young Henry who was powerless. But by the spring of 1182, it looked though Richard was in a bit of a pickle. I'll explain. Aquitaine had always been a domain that Henry II struggled to keep under control, especially now he's imprisoned one half of the power couple that helped make the Angevin Empire what it was, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Since her absence, the king had become everything that people feared, a horrid tyrant who ruled by the sword. He was gathering enemies with each passing month. So, during the spring of 1182, the rebel factions of Aquitaine were rising up again, and this new uprising was initially being suppressed by young Richard, who by now was a strappingly tall man in his mid-20s, another icon of chivalry. This is Richard the Lionheart, but even Richard was finding Aquitaine too much to handle, so he asked support for his father, Henry II. Right. The old king arrives at the head of an army, and once there, summons the young king and his Meunier to aid in the conflict. And yes, the Marshal is placed once again in the field of war, to advise the young king in pacifying the region. Then, on July the 1st, the young king successfully sieged the castle at Périgord, which ended the short conflict. Job done. But bringing young Henry here was a dangerous move, because what was previously unknown is that there was growing resentment against this so-called Lionheart, who was in every way a mirror of his tyrannical father. People were plotting to overthrow Richard, and this powerful underground rebel faction had also gained the attention of young Henry. The young king could easily have slung them all in chains for the mercy of the old king. He could have ended this. Instead, he chose to listen. Would Henry really go to war with his brother, the Lionheart, part of the prophecy of Merlin? Going by the legends of the era. There was even talk of crusade, because tales are emerging of another powerful king in the east, Saladin. The only person keeping peace there is the leper king of Jerusalem, King Baldwin IV. All this deeply tempted Henry, who toyed with the idea of taking the cross, stopping short of vowing to head to the Holy Land, because if he did, it may as well be a one-way trip. Maybe the future of the young king lay not in England, but in Jerusalem. There was a lot going on in the young king's mind. Then, in the autumn of 1182, young Henry travelled with his wife Marjorie to the court of the Capetian king in Paris. Young Henry is demanding from his friend Philippe that the power of the Duke of Normandy should be his, and his alone, not his tyrannical father. It looked like rebellion was once again inevitable, and this time old Henry II wouldn't be facing a stroppy teenager. He'd be facing the most feared knights in Europe. But as for the Marshal, he has bigger problems. Problems that threaten to ruin his long friendship with the young king. For he's accused of sleeping with the wife of young Henry, Marjorie, the half-sister to Philip of France.